Hi everyone, hope everybody's enjoying their Sunday afternoon, and we welcome you to this District 69 training. And if anyone is here, we know there's at least one person here, maybe others from District 72 in New Zealand, or if there's anyone from elsewhere around the world, then welcome. Margaret.
Good afternoon all. Lovely to see you all, your smiling faces. And we're going to get stuck straight into it. We've got a lot to cover.
So these are the points we'll be going over this afternoon. So you can read through them yourself. I don't like to be a person who reads verbatim off a slideshow, but you can see that there's quite a bit to cover this afternoon, so we will get started now. And one of the first things that we'll cover, or the very first thing we'll cover, is the difference between evaluation and judging. So evaluation, of course, is, some would say it's the secret ingredient, but it's one of the cornerstones of what makes Toastmasters such an effective self-improvement course, because you get to hear what you did right and what you can do better next time, and so that helps you improve and improve and improve. But that's totally different to the concepts of judging. So would you like to start with the first point there, maybe, Margaret?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we as Toastmasters, our reason for living basically is to help others. And evaluations do exactly that. And we use them all the time. We all know how to do them. But they're entirely based on our opinion. And we give that opinion in good faith in the hope that we'll help others. But that's not what a judging is it, Kevin?
No, certainly not. So in judging, it's trying to remove opinion and trying to remove bias and all that sort of stuff, and trying to focus purely and solely on the marking criteria. And if it's not in the marking criteria, then we're supposed to ignore it.
Yeah, and evaluation, again, evaluation is a skill that we've all spent many years, most of us, developing. And it is always about help and assisting another speaker to improve. And that's why we do evaluations and why we do them the way we do them, the systems that we use. Our sandwich evaluation, for instance, is to be of great assistance to encourage our fellow Toastmasters and to give them some points for improvement to go for the next time they speak. But that's not judging either.
No, and some people like and some people don't like, whatever. But especially when it comes to kids' sports, you might see some sports, they'll say that every kid that competes gets a medal, or every person that competes gets a sash or a ribbon or something. But I'm afraid that's not the case when it comes to Toastmasters speaking contests. In a Toastmasters contest, the purpose of a judge, the primary reason why they exist in the whole concept of a speaking contest, is to pick a winner. Not a tie, but a winner and a clear second and a clear third. And if they're a tie-bracket judge, then they have to pick no ties all the way down to if there's 4 contestants, or if there's 10 contestants, they have to separate all 10 of them. So that's your reason for living if you're a judge.
Yeah, which is quite different to being an evaluator. Evaluators, we do what we do because we're interested in helping others. And everyone deserves a good evaluation. It doesn't matter about the speaker. There's no first or second or third evaluations. We do our evaluations to help our speakers and ourselves improve. But at judging, it's great. There's a big difference. There's only first, second, and third place getters.
Yep, and that's why we don't. We give out participation certificates to everybody who participates, and that's great. But the only ones who get the trophy or trophies, if there's more than one, is the first place champion or the runners up if there's multiple trophies, and there'll be a first, second, and third certificate if there's enough contestants in the contest.
Yeah. And it's about the difference too with regards to reactions. I mean, the reactions that you will get from a speaker when you're giving them an evaluation are entirely different to what we're talking about here, judging strictly against a criteria. There's no focus on what can be done better next time. It's that speech on the day.
Exactly. So, and we try to react to the speech the same every time. So even if it's the first time we've heard it, or if it's the 100th time we heard it, you have to treat it like it's the first time, and don't compare it to the same speech that you heard by the same speaker at the previous level. So if this is the area contest, don't compare it to what they did a few weeks ago in the club. Treat it as a brand new speech that you're hearing for the first time.
And again, the difference between evaluation and judging. Evaluators are there for assistance. They're obliged to give constructive criticism and useful, informative feedback. And that's not what a judging contest is about.
Exactly. So with the judges, one of the reasons why judges are supposed to not be known and remain anonymous is that they don't want contestants coming up to them afterwards and saying, how could I have improved that? Or how come that one got a higher place than me? Or something like that. So, and even if a contestant comes up afterwards and identifies you as a judge and asks you straight out, how could I do better next time? I'm afraid as a judge, you have to say, sorry, what happens as a judge stays as a judge, and I'm not allowed to give you any evaluation on your presentation. I would love to be able to help you if I see it in a normal speech, but I can't when it comes to a presentation that's done in a contest. Sorry, but that's it.
So they're very, very different. Evaluating and judging, two entirely different animals.
So now that we've got that out of the way, believe it or not, judges have to qualify to be a judge as well. The same as contestants have to have criteria for which contest they can go into and which clubs they can compete for and all that. So at a club level, I'd like to go over that, Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, at a club level, it's so much fun, isn't it? Because everyone in our club, in all clubs, are encouraged from day one to be involved in the contest. Doesn't matter how long you've been in the club or how many speeches that you have given, everyone can get in and have a go at the, apart from the international, at the other three contests if they want to, and are encouraged to do so. So as long as everyone is a member in good standing, in a club of good standing, that's all that the eligibility for a club involves.
Yep, exactly. And for a judge at a club level contest, their criteria for being a judge is the same as a contestant criteria for any of the contests except for international. So it's exactly the same criteria. To be a judge, all they have to be is a member of good standing in a club of good standing. But it is different as you get up the levels. So a judge at an area or division or district contest, they do have a few more criteria, and it's almost equivalent of what a contestant would have to be to compete in the international contest. So it's equivalent to that, and they have to be that at every level of the contest, from area, division, and district. And there's also a little bit extra about the a longer period of being a financial member. So it's not just they've paid it last night and it went through to World Headquarters last night, and so therefore they're a paid member. They have to have been still a paid member for the last 6 months as a minimum.
And those things are in place for very good reason. When people move up to area and division, certainly to district, they deserve a very high quality judge.
Yep, exactly. And so moving on, these are some of the personal qualities that we would be looking for in a judge, not the technical requirement, but the personal qualities. So avoiding bias, that's something that we're going to talk a lot more in depth about in our next slide. But would you like to go on with
it's hard, isn't it, to really recognise and keep top of mind while you're judging of identifying any little bias you may have. So it's got to be something that you need to keep in mind, and that's where the judging criteria comes in handy. That's your roadmap. That keeps you on track and keeps your mind set where it needs to be to deliver an unbiased judgment of someone's speech.
Exactly.
And then obviously there are, sometimes we might think to ourselves, whilst judges should not be able to see the timing in any way, shape or form, if you think you get through a speech and you think that, gee, I think that fellow's gone over time, don't allow that to change your opinion of the adherence to the criteria that speaker did. It's not your choice or to even be thinking about whether that person might have gone over time or not, is it, Kevin?
No, because one of the actual contest rules for the timer is that they only show the lights to the contestant, and that's why we have a often a shield or just a very narrow light beam, so to try and stop everybody else in the audience, and including the judges, from being able to see whether or not it's been on the red light for a long time. And so judge should be able to mark their scorecard without any consideration for whether or not they think the person has been disqualified on time. And that's following on to the next point there on the sheet. That is one of the rules, that they're not supposed to know whether it went over time or not. Only the two timers and the chief judge are supposed to know whether or not anybody went over time when they're filling out their voting form to decide who came first, second and third.
Yeah, and then the last point, of course, is judges have to be anonymous. Not revealing that you're participating in that contest as a judge is terribly important. So everyone needs to keep in mind that that's the case. And maybe that means you need to avoid speaking to different people when you're being sociable at a contest, to make sure that you are not revealed as a judge or any scores that you might have given.
Yep. And you'll see when we come to the criteria sheet later that even the sheet that you hand to the ballot counters to go, which is then given to the chief judge and the ballot counters in the counting room, they don't even get to see what your scores were. It's your private information. You rip the places off the bottom of the sheet and hand that into the ballot counter, and not even the chief judge gets to see what scores you gave. So you definitely should not be telling any of the contestants or joking about it afterwards over at the water cooler.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, from that first point on the previous page, from my point of view, as far as I'm concerned, this is the most important slide in the first half of this presentation until we get up to the criteria sheets, because this is the one that defines whether or not you're going to be a good judge, whether it's a judge in a Toastmasters speaking contest or whether it's a judge in anything else. Whether you can bake a good sponge cake at the ladies auxiliary, or whether you can award the Olympic gold medal for gymnastics or diving. Every type of contest, including all four of the different Toastmasters contests, every type of contest can have different technical requirements and different scorecards. But these things that you see on the screen here, they should apply across the board to judges of all contests. So let's just go over. Would you like to start the first one, Margaret?
Yeah, I've always found it a very interesting one, how some people will use the speaking order, the position that the speaker's going to speak in, as something that even concerns them. You know, someone may have a thought that, oh, if the person speaks first, or if I judge them first, I may judge them differently to the person who's the fourth, fifth, or seventh speaker. So it's important that you are aware of that little judgment or that little bias can sneak in there just when you don't need it to, and take that into consideration. Someone's got to go first and someone's got to go last, and it makes absolutely no difference to the judge, whether that person spoke first or last.
Yep. And then the next two are very similar, but this can happen mainly at if you have inexperienced judges at, say, a club level contest, and they think, oh, Mary and Billy, they've been competing every year for the last 3 or 4 years, and Mary wins every single year. Well, maybe it's time we give Billy a chance and call him the winner this year, even though Mary did a better speech. Well, as a judge, we're not allowed to do that. It has to be based on what the speech is on that day during those 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 7 minutes. And if the best speaker happens to have won before, well, that doesn't come into it. If they're the best speaker, then they're the best speaker.
That's right. And I've heard some people even say that they sometimes get a little bias, going that if they think that person that they're marking might not perform well at the next level, they may change their criteria or their thinking a little bit in anticipation of what might happen at the next level. And that's dangerous and something you've got to be really careful of. This is what you are judging on today, and it doesn't matter whether they've won 20 times or once. You've got to judge the speech on its merits on the day.
Exactly. And going on to the next point, this one particularly important when it comes to humour, but it applies to every single part of a speech, especially if you've heard the same contestant saying the speech at, say, club level, and then you hear it again at area, and then you hear it again at division. You know yourself, if somebody tells a joke, it might be funny the first time, but by the 10th or 30th time, it's not necessarily as funny. But you have to pretend that whether it's a joke or whether it's any part, whether it's the punchline at the end of a really motivational speech, you have to pretend like it's the very first time you've ever heard it. And that's part of being a judge, I'm afraid. Because it doesn't matter whether you think, oh, they did it better a few weeks ago when they were at the previous contest. And so therefore I'll mark them down this time because I know that they've done it better before.
Mm.
Mark it on what you see that day. Don't unfairly mark it down or unfairly mark it up because you know they can do it better. So I'll give them a few extra points because I know that they can do it better.
Mm.
Don't do that. Do it what is in that 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 7 minutes right there and then on the day, not some other time that they may or may not have presented it.
And it needs for us as judges to keep our wits about us. We need to be aware of these things. We need to be having our mindset, reminding ourselves of those things so we don't fall into a little catch like that. Like, I've heard this before, I've heard it before, therefore I'm not going to mark it quite as highly.
Yep. And so then we go on to unusual or creative things that might happen in different presentations. So some of these could be as different as maybe somebody uses a PowerPoint slide in a presentation at a contest, or maybe somebody presents a large part or the entire speech as a poem, a rhyming poem that keeps rhyming over and over and over again. You think, well, it's not supposed to be a poem, so therefore I'll give it no marks. But you have to still follow the judging criteria of, did it meet this criteria? Did it meet this one? Did it meet this one? Did it meet this one? So it doesn't matter if it's not what you're expecting. You have to still follow the same criteria. And some other examples, maybe, Margaret?
I remember going to, I'm sure it was a district conference. It was quite a few years ago now, and in the humorous contest, every single one of the contestants had full-blown sets, just about, not just a couple of props. They had just about a set. And it struck me, everyone did it, everyone was doing the same thing, but it struck me as it being more of a comedy skit than a speech. And I've noticed that I haven't seen that repeated since then. But it certainly was entertaining, and it certainly entertained me, and it just made it harder to get some space between the decisions because they were all so good. But anything that's creative and interesting, something you haven't seen before, you have a tendency to give them that little bit extra mark. But make sure you refer back to the criteria before you do that, because if it was outside of the criteria, it doesn't count.
Yep, exactly. And so then we come to like personal biases or even in some cases unknown biases that you have without even realizing it. Someone might come out in a beautiful ladies in a beautiful dress or gents in a brand new suit, and then the next person comes out in presentable, but it might be jeans and a business shirt or jeans and a short sleeve shirt. And some people will unconsciously think, oh, they obviously don't want to be here because they're not even getting dressed up. But yeah, if you try to follow the judging criteria of you just mark it on the criteria, and as long as the person's presentable, then I've paid to go to business presentations where one of the key speakers for the day came out in running gear, like silk shorts and a singlet, because they were giving a presentation on something that suited that particular costume that they were wearing at the time. Yeah. And so you can't, does what they're wearing subtract from the overall impression of the presentation. And if it doesn't, if it is still presentable and is still fits in with the criteria, then it shouldn't affect your prejudices. Or another one might be accents. As long as you can understand what the person is saying, then you should try to ignore whether or not you like an accent or you don't like an accent. You might really like Irish accents, but it doesn't mean that you have to give them a higher score, or someone else might not like an Irish accent and they give it a lower score. But the idea is that you try to ignore the accent and just go on the judging criteria.
Mm. Yeah, and it's probably one of the hardest things to do, is particularly with accents. It's probably one of the hardest things to do, is to make sure that you are clear and steadfast in line with the criteria.
Yep. So if you can't understand what the person is saying, then obviously they're not going to get as good a score. But if you can understand them, don't mark them down just because they've got an accent. And there might be other personal preferences that people have. Somebody might just like people who have red hair, or they don't like people with blonde hair and blue eyes. Any sort of random personal bias that they have to try and overcome if they can, and just mark on the judging criteria.
And I don't think a little bit of flamboyance, as long as it's in pace with the speech and your message, and it adds to the speech, wearing something a little different, or even pretend, or using different voices even in a speech, is quite permissible.
Yep. So there's so many different things that we could cover in that objectivity part of the presentation, but I think we might move on at this point. And now we come to the actual, what does the judge do? So, and there's 4 levels of judging. So there's a chief judge, there's the assistant chief judge, there's a voting judge, and there's a tiebreaker judge. And every single one of those 4 levels has to be qualified as a judge. So they have to fill out the eligibility form, and they have to meet those requirements for whether they've been a financial member for 6 months, and all those sorts of criteria. So, but at the contest itself, there might be a specific role, or before the contest, that each different level has a different role. So in the case of the chief judge, one of their roles is that they are the overall arbitrator of whether or not a protest is upheld or dismissed. So if somebody brings a protest, they have to work out, it doesn't have to be solo, they can have other people involved in the decision, but they have to be the final arbitrator of whether the person is disqualified or whether they're still allowed to be on the amongst those eligible for a place.
Yeah, it's an important job as the chief judge. It's an important job. You have to appoint judges, you have to know your judges, you have to know that they're capable of doing this job, and you're responsible for briefing them.
Yep. And so, and of course, as a chief judge, you have to make sure that the rule book is followed as closely as possible. But then there's other levels of judges. So assistant chief judge, a lot of what you read on the screen there is taken from not a Toastmasters International sheet, but it's a district guide, and it's more procedural and logistical. But assistant chief judge is there to assist the chief judge. Funny that. That's probably why they call it the assistant chief judge. And then we go on to the voting judges. So that's what the majority of the judges are, is filling out the marking sheet, the criteria sheet. And of course, they have to do all that before the contest, as you can see on the screen. But then the most important thing that they have to do on the day is correctly fill out the judging ballot. And that includes signing and putting your name at the bottom and making sure that you've picked the winner, and you've also picked a second and a third if there's enough contestants. So then we come to the other judge that nobody knows who they are. Well, I mean, nobody's supposed to know who the voting judges are, but then we come to the tiebreaker judge, and not even the other judges are supposed to know who the tiebreaker is. The assistant chief judge is not supposed to know who the tiebreaker is. The timers are not supposed to know who the tiebreaker is. So the chief judge is supposed to be the only person in the whole room who knows who the tiebreaker is. And so their responsibility, they don't just pick first, second, and third. If there's 4 contestants, they have to put down 1, 2, 3, 4, and no ties anywhere in the 4. And if there's 10 contestants, they have to put from 1 all the way down to 10 and no ties anywhere in the 10. So they have to place every single contestant from first down to however many contestants there are. And that becomes extremely important later on. It is possible that the tiebreaker judge has done all that work and their score sheet never even gets looked at. But if a tie occurs in the ballot counting room, then their sheet is the most important one there. And that's when it cannot contain a tie, because it has to break the tie from the other judges.
That's right. Yeah, and this judge's job is a little stressful, I might think, because it is something that is so crucial, so important. So as a chief judge, make sure that your selection of a tie-breaking judge, that you know that they understand how to break a tie, they understand how to fill out that form, and that they know if it is brought into play, that they're absolutely confident that they have done the right thing. It's critical.
Yep. So then we move on to another section. So some different topics that might come up every now and again, and we'll just cover these as we go. So the first one is the use of humour. Now, obviously, you want humour to be in the humorous contest, but that doesn't mean that it can't be in the other contest, does it, Margaret?
It's been used. I've seen some speakers use humour that, and I think I've heard people say, if you want to win an international, make them laugh, make them cry, and then you've got a winning speech. So it's certainly a part of any speech, and definitely part of an international speech, just because as long as it follows the rest of the criteria, i.e. it has a message, and that humour isn't just there to be funny, it's got to have a point.
Yep. So as you say, don't just say a one-liner or even a longer joke just to put a joke in because somebody said that you're allowed to. If it's got nothing to do with the speech, then you'll get marks taken off because it was lost flow of the speech, lost continuity. But if it applies to the point that you're trying to make and enriches the communication between you and the audience in increasing and amplifying the message that you're trying to communicate, then why not use humour?
Yeah, I mean, humour is something that makes an audience warm to you. It's a wonderful tool to use. And I personally, I use it whenever I can, because I really think it's an important thing to be able to do, but it can't detract from the point and the reason for what the message that you're trying to get across in your speech. Otherwise, a judge will mark you down.
Yep, because as it says there on that last line, sorry. However, judges can mark accordingly based on how appropriately that humour was in the speech. So if it was appropriate, then it benefited the communication that you made. And if it wasn't, then it detracted from it, and it's probably gonna make you lose some points. So use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it. And then we go on to originality. And some people, let's put it this way, in the dictionary, there might be more than one definition of original. So some people believe that this means that you have to invent a brand new speech from scratch every single year, and that it has to be a new speech. You can't reuse an old speech. But that's not the interpretation of originality that's used in a Toastmasters contest, speech contest rulebook. So they're after the interpretation of the word where it's original as opposed to plagiarized from somebody else's original work. So original doesn't mean new in the space of a contest speaking for Toastmasters. Original means it's your own original work, even if it's the first time you've done it or you've been doing the same speech for the last 20 years. It's still, if it's your original work, you can continue to deliver it year after year. And I know I've heard numerous times from not one but two different world champions from our own district that both of them said, that's Jock Elliott and Mark Hunter, have said that they've redone a speech over and over and over and got it better and better and better every time, but it was the same basic speech.
Yeah. And what I think what happens a little bit too is it gets a little bit confused with using quotes or ideas that have come from elsewhere, which is totally permissible, but you just need to make sure that the audience and the judges are aware that you are giving correct ownership to that quote or that sentence. And that doesn't mean you have to sit there and recite who it was from. You just have to make it clear. Yep. That it was something that someone else said. Oh, Billy Shakespeare used to say X, Y, Z. So that is enough to tell the judge that that is a quote you're making and you're giving due ownership and credit to that person.
Yep. And as it says, you want to, it's all just about making sure that you're not plagiarizing somebody else. So it doesn't, you don't have to spend 3 minutes of a 7-minute speech saying it was done by this character in this scene from that act, from that play, written by this person. You can just say it in a couple of seconds, like, Shakespeare may have said that all the world's a stage, but I believe ... So I got the reference out of the way in the space of a couple of seconds. You don't have to spend a long time, but as a judge, I would treat that as fully referenced, saying that he said that it wasn't his work, it was somebody else's.
Just on that, Kevin, if instead of saying Shakespeare said this, if you said in Macbeth, they said this, would that be enough, in your opinion?
Well, you're attributing it to somebody else's work, so yes.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Thank you.
But of course, because we would never say Macbeth out loud, because you would say the Scottish play.
Hamlet. Yeah.
And the other thing that is reasonably new to the rule book is the reference to the ability for a judge or a contestant who are the only two people that can raise a protest, is the reference to another speaker or speech that's in that same contest. Kevin, can you go over that?
Yep. So I've heard third hand. So this is not my information, but apparently in some parts of the world that the first contestant will get up and they'll do their presentation, and then the second contestant might get up and they'll reference the first one, and then the third contestant might get up and they'll reference the first and the second one, and it might be done in a positive sense or it might be done in a negative derogatory sense, but they'll refer to other contestants that have been on the stage earlier in the day. And so Toastmasters International have put a brand new rule in the rule book. I think it was about 12 months ago or something, that that says referring to another contestant's presentation in your presentation is now regarded as against the rules for originality.
Yeah, it's a point that someone could raise a protest, a legitimate protest over.
Yep. And so just keep those changes in rules in mind, and for that reason you do have to reread the rule book every year to make sure what has changed. So moving on to the next point, props and the use of electronic equipment. So did you want to start with this one, Margaret?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction here that has to be drawn. If you're using a telephone, for instance, and we've seen many speakers successfully use a telephone to as a prop, to use a different voice or make a point or have a conversation with someone else during their speech. That's not the same as using your phone to look something up, for someone else to use the phone to send you a message. That's two entirely different things. And whilst a phone is phone, it is a prop, or it's being used to gather some sort of, or glean some sort of advantage, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah, so several years ago, there was a rule introduced into the contest rule book that said the electronic equipment weren't allowed to be used by contestants for table topics and evaluation contests. And from my understanding, it was so that somebody in the room didn't send them an SMS that said, "Oh, this is what the table topic is," and so therefore you've got an extra 5 minutes to prepare your table topic than what the earlier people had. And obviously that would be grossly unfair to anybody who didn't have advanced knowledge of it. And the same for evaluations. If you got an SMS that said, "Oh, this one gave this person before you gave a really good, strong recommendation in their speech, and maybe you'd like to include that in your evaluation when you come in and deliver it." So that would be grossly unfair. And so that was, as far as I know, that's the reason why the rule was introduced. Yeah. But it as far as being able to, like, if I'm giving a presentation and I say, if I'm part of my international speech is that I'm on a phone call and I just pick up and say, "Yeah, Bill, how are you going?" "Oh, that's great, thanks." And I put my hand down again. That's just a prop. I could do the same thing by doing that, but either way, it's just a prop. And so that's not taking advantage of electronic equipment. That's just a prop. But one of the other things that's got on the screen there is that, like, I've seen at a division level, for an international contest, the person wanted to use overhead projection from a PowerPoint, and it went over quite well. It fitted in very well with their presentation, and on their particular topic that they were speaking about, I think as a person who was not judging that contest, I think it actually enhanced the presentation. But I don't know what the judges thought on the day, but it was completely allowed. But you have to remember that if I was the contestant that wanted to do that, then I would have to make sure that I had all the equipment set up ready, and I only had that 60 seconds, 1 minute to get it all ready. And if it wasn't ready in that 60 seconds, then too bad, you're not going to be allowed to use it, because you've only got the 60 seconds between contestants to set up for your presentation. And it's your responsibility as a contestant to have it set up ready. It's not the Sergeant at Arms' responsibility to have it set up. It's not the contest Toastmaster's responsibility. It says in the rule book that it's your responsibility. You can have somebody assist you, but it's your responsibility. And if it doesn't happen in the 60 seconds, then too bad. It's your fault. It didn't get done.
Yep.
So if we can move on to the next point. A fun one, if there ever was. Protests and disqualifications. Now, obviously, if somebody goes over time or under time, then there's a means for a disqualification there. But there's also means for disqualifications if somebody raises a protest about originality. So would you like to speak on this one, Margaret?
Yeah, it's a really important and sometimes a bit of a grey area as to what constitutes ineligibility or lack of originality. But the point is that someone can raise a protest. So you need to make sure in your speech that you're giving yourself your best possible chance and that you stay away from things that might be a little bit dicey, so you don't give the judge or a wrong impression to a judge and therefore, or another contestant who may then raise a protest. Protests don't happen very often, but when they do, they can be very tricky and very time consuming. So just make sure that you have your ducks in a row, that you know that you are okay. And if a protest is made, the judges will attend to that as per the rule book, and there is an opportunity, the judges must interview the contestant, and there is a process that's used to decide whether that protest is upheld or not.
Yep. And who can raise a protest? Can anyone in the audience just raise a protest? Oh, I'm sure I've heard that somewhere on the internet, Margaret.
No, there's only two people that can do that, and that's a judge or a contestant. No one in the audience who feels that Fred was disadvantaged by something, and that's going to be interesting when it gets to the online contest. It is only a judge and a contestant. Excellent.
And when if they look it up on the internet afterwards and they see that the next day they want to put in a protest because they feel that they've been badly done by.
Yeah, well, that's the rule book is very straightforward and very clear, that if you feel that you want to lodge a protest, you must do it with the chief judge, the contest chair or / contest Toastmaster, prior to the contest Toastmaster starting to commence to pronounce the first place getters. So you can't wait until the morning after and look things up and go, oh, you know, that was, I want to protest over eligibility or originality, because here it is on the internet that this was said by somebody else and that wasn't acknowledged. It's too late.
Yep. So, yep. If you want to put a protest, if you're a contestant or you're a voting judge, then make sure you give it to the chief judge or the contest toastmaster before they start reading out the names of the third, second and first, because as soon as they start reading out those names, it's too late. You've kept silent for that long. You have to keep silent forever now.
I've got a quick question there, Kevin. If a international speaker comes back to the audience, you're sitting beside them, and you say to that contestant, he didn't quote ABC, is that allowed? And then he can, that contestant can now say, oh, really? Is it, was that a quote? And then they can lodge a protest on that ground, even though you've made them aware of it.
That's a great question, Dan. And can I refer you to
the grey area?
This particular document,
okay.
which is the speech contest rule, but explanation of changes. So this is an explanation of changes from 1 year to the next. And if we go over to where I was on page 6 here, it says, the chief judge, contest chair, voting judges and contestants must not consider protests from audience members, which is what we said. But then in the explanation, it tells you that this rule specifies, it tells you in this explanation here anyway, that if a member of the audience goes up and says to a judge that you should put in a protest because I know this, and then they want the judge to then put in a protest to the chief judge, well, as it explains in this document, you're not supposed to do that.
Is that clear, Kevin?
It may be revealed in the course of the proceedings when a protest is lodged, that the judges will be looking very closely at why that, in this case, in this scenario, was a member of the audience inciting, for want of a better word, a contestant, then that will probably become obvious during that process as well.
Yep, so in here it says, while the rules previously stated that protests shall be lodged only by voting judges and contestants, it was not clear whether an audience member could bring a protest to a contestant or judge for them to lodge with the chief judge or contest chair. So this rule now specifies that protests from audience members must not be considered.
Very well. If I can add a second part to that, Kevin, if people don't mind. And it was just in the chat as well, what the Pam was talking about. And the lady that won 2 years ago, her speech was, I'm Still Standing. And at the end of it, she sang that song by Elton John, I'm Still Standing. Yeah, 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 the audience responded. Didn't reference Elton John. Now, the fact that you sing the song, it's pretty obvious that it's a song. It's a well-known song. And the reason I asked that is because it wasn't only about the same time, maybe even 3 years ago, someone had a protest on, they did similar, I am, we are Australian, and sang at the end of the speech, and they got disqualified in District 69. And then you saw it come up in the World Champion of Public Speaking. So I'm just after sort of opening the forum, what people think about that. I thought it was pretty obvious, but I'm happy for people to what their thoughts are.
Well, the critical question is, in the case of the lady who didn't, was that protest brought by a judge or a contestant prior to the winners being announced? And clearly that wasn't the case. So the rule stands. You can't do it after the winners have been announced. There might be a lot of chat about it, but it won't change the result.
No, there was no protest for the world champion that year. It was not even mentioned. What I was surprised about is that there was a similar protest in the district level or the area level around the same time, give or take a year, and it got upheld. And it just asked, a lot of people said, well, where's the balance here? And that's really what I want to talk about now is, how particular are we going to go to?
Well,
sorry, they're two different contests. What happened in that contest happened in that contest. There's no just because that happened that contest, this should happen in this contest.
Yeah, it's not even a part of the rule book. It's really the opinion of, if someone sings a song, do they have to reference it? Is really the core of the question.
Well, if
They would be advised to.
yeah, definitely. If they want to, well, actually singing a few words or a few lines falls into that creativity side, that whether or not it increases the ability to communicate your message or whether it detracts from it. But as far as if they have done that and they haven't said the name of the song or where it's from or the name of the singer or the name of the songwriter in any way, shape or form, then you would have to think that that is not giving due credit to the person that you've used their original work instead of your own.
In this case, it must have gone all the way from club up to, well, it was the final international speech, but you would have thought somebody would have commented on it before, because that was actually the winner of the world champion.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how no one ever picked it up, not even on the day, not another contestant and not another judge questioned it.
Well, I know that protests do happen, so but it's as we said, it's not allowed to come from the audience. So the audience might all think that it deserves a protest, but it would be up to the judges or the contestants to raise the protest. And if they did, then the chief judge would have to consider it. And if the contestant did not reference it properly, then it might very well be grounds for disqualification.
Well, yeah, that's really the question, isn't it, Kevin?
If they referenced it and the person protesting just didn't hear the reference, if they were looking at their phone, or if they were sort of concentrating on something else and they just didn't hear the reference, and there was a reference, and at the point of giving the contestant right of reply as part of due process, and the contestant can say that, yep, I definitely did reference it, then if they did, then
it's fine.
The protest would be dismissed. But if they didn't, it's quite likely that the protest would be upheld.
Jenny's just got a hand up there too, Kevin. Jenny Owens.
Kev, I just wanted to give an example that last year, as a chief judge, I was given a protest by email the day after the person's wasn't a judge. They were not even a contest chair. They were a representative of the area. And they wrote an email saying that they didn't agree with the winner because they felt that this particular person had plagiarised. It was in a humorous contest, I think it was, plagiarised, lines. They'd heard these speeches before, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, of course, I had to decline that because, yes, the winners had been announced. I had never heard it before either. And so it was let go at that. One of the other things that I just wanted to ask you there, and I know we're talking about protests and disqualifications, checking the eligibility of judges and grid people. I had an experience last year where a contest chair was getting up, and I always have a habit of checking all of the contestants and the judges and so forth, and I was checking the grid people that were coming and doing the official timing, ballot counting and so forth. And one of those had not paid, this particular person was contest chair, and had not paid their membership, so therefore wasn't even a Toastmaster in the words of eligibility. And I had to decline them from being the contest chair until such times as they could prove to me that their membership was paid.
Yeah, but
So,
may have caused a bit of a stir if you had to go looking around for a contest chair at the last moment, but it certainly wouldn't have caused a protest.
No, everybody was quite
it wouldn't have
prepared to.
caused an official protest because they weren't a contestant.
No, they wouldn't have caused a protest in that sense. It was my protest because this person, you know, there was plenty of people around that could be a contest chair and read a script. But the thing is that we have eligibility of judges and eligibility of contestants, but we also need to have, we should be making sure the eligibility of all the participating grid people as well, that they are Toastmasters and are in the appropriate position.
Yep, and there's actually lots of things that need to go into the organising of a contest, but we without being disrespectful to you, Jenny, that wasn't actually what we were going to talk about today.
Yep, that's fine.
But it's great that you've raised it as an example.
I think people need to be aware.
Thank you for that. Yeah. On that, just when you say eligibility, that is one of the grounds for disqualification. So I know Toastmasters International put out a special thing in their addendum to the rulebook back in March, saying that their online eligibility checking tool wouldn't necessarily work in April 2020 because they allowed people who hadn't paid in March 2020 to still be counted as paid in a club a member in good standing in a club of good standing, even though the website checker said that they weren't. So that was a special message that came out from World Headquarters that said, it's not their wording, but they more or less said we'll fix it up later if it really is wrong, but take it that they are paid if it's in April 2020. How are we now? We've gone just over the hour, and we're into the judging criteria. So thank you for those questions. But do you mind if we keep moving? So here we go. So a lot of what we've spoken about so far is to do with the logistics and the organisational side of the judging, but now we actually get down to the nitty-gritty of filling out the criteria, marking form, and picking your places. So here we go. If there's anybody in the audience who has never judged or hasn't even been to a contest before, then some of this may be new to you, but believe it or not, every different type of Toastmasters contest has its own marking form. And here's an example of one. And I know the rules of PowerPoint say that you shouldn't put more than half a dozen words or lines or something on a page, but we're going to break that for these slides because it's going to be absolutely chockers on these slides. So I apologize in advance, but that's what an international speech contest looks like on the front of the form. And you'll note that the criteria on the left-hand side here, there's lots of different subcategories, but then they're sort of grouped up into larger super categories. So those three there are grouped into content. So the speech content, these three are grouped into speech delivery, and those two of appropriateness and correctness are grouped into language. And so every type of contest has their own breakdown of content, delivery, and language, and they can be different for every type of content, so every type of contest, but they'll all have some part of content, delivery, and language as part of their marking criteria. And just on a note, so look, the way that we're going through this today, it's how we do it as judges, but there is no right or wrong way to fill out a form. So I'm going to give a few different options for how to fill out a form. For instance, some judges, they'll put contestant number 1 in column 10. Oh, well, they'll put the names of the contestants starting over here for contestant 1 in column 10, and contestant number 2 in column 9, and contestant number 3 in column 8, and so forth, coming this way from right to left along the form. And then after contestant 1 has done their speech, they'll have all their scores in here, and then they'll take that line in between 9 and 10, and they'll fold along that line so that 10 is now underneath the piece of paper and they can't see it anymore, and the only one they can see is this completely blank form ready for the second contestant to fill in column 9. And then when that contestant is finished, they'll fold along the vertical line between 8 and 9. They'll fold all the way down there, and they'll have a completely blank form looking in front of them so that they can just concentrate on the next contestant. Other people will start here, contestant 1 in column 1, contestant 2 in column 2, and so on, and they'll go from left to right, just like any normal piece of paper, and they'll go down there, and they may put a ruler or a piece of paper or something over that when they go on to the next one, or they might not. Just depends on whether or not they want to see those other scores when they're making the contestant 2 and contestant 3 scores. It is different for different judges how they want to do it, and I know that I'll make little notes about what they did right or what they did wrong as the contestant is speaking. But Jim, are you there? Did you want to speak about how you do pluses and minuses instead of notes?
Thank you, Kevin. As you previously mentioned, some people like to take notes when they do their speeches, but other people like to focus more on the speech itself and only take a few notes. So what I do is either on a separate sheet of paper or on the side of the form where there's a blank space between outside the matrix, I'll put a plus or a minus next to each category. So say, for example, Margaret had really good speech development. I could put a plus or maybe 2 pluses if it was outstanding there, and then go down the list and have pluses and minuses for each category. Just so once I'm looking back and I've only got a minute to mark them down before the next speech comes, I can see in a quick glance what each category was to give me a quick reminder to help jog my memory. So I can go, yes, speech development was great. I remember now, that's a 14. Effectiveness, that wasn't so good. I remember now, a minus, I'll give that a 7 as an example. However, once I've done all that and I've done all the numbers in a minute, I won't put in the total score until after all the contestants have completed their speeches. So I don't know what the score is. So there's no comparing between one and the other. They're all judged individually. Yep.
And so I know if I have time, I will add up the marks, but for certainly for international and definitely for humorous, I usually don't have anywhere near enough time to add up the marks. So I don't get to add up the marks until after I've finished the scores for the last contestant. But for stuff like the table topics or the evaluation, I usually do have time to add up the marks as I go. So different people, different ways. But yeah, so did you have something else about how you do a particular scoring sheet there, Margaret?
Yeah, I try. I must admit, I do the covering up of the previous, because there's just a temptation there to go against that other person, I think. And I must admit, I don't know why, but I also use the lower end of the scales a little bit between them as well. I think it's a personal thing, and we're there to find a winner at the end of the day. And as long as you use whatever method suits you to be as impartial and take every speech on its merits without consideration of the previous one, I think that's a good job done.
Yep. And as you say, Margaret, some people have different generosity of scoring, I suppose, is one way to put it. And so some judges, they will deliberately pick the first contestant and put them somewhere in the middle so that they've got room to go below that score and above that score. But then they also have to refer to that original score to know whether they're above it or below it.
And that's probably the problem.
So other people will decide whether it was fair, good, very good, or excellent before they look at the scores, and then they'll see that speech development good was between 9 and 13, so or I'll give it an 11 because I'll give it a 12 because it was on the high side of good, not the low side of good. And then they'll go on to the next one for effectiveness, and they might decide that the effectiveness was excellent, and so they'll see that that should be up towards the 15 mark, and the speech value, well, it might have been just a series of one-liners, and so they give that maybe 1 out of 15. Different judges will do it completely different ways, but the point is that as long as they achieve their purpose in life, which is to pick a winner, then if they come up with a winner and a second and a third, if there's enough contestants, then they've achieved their purpose. So whether they give low marks, whether they give high marks, whether they give different marks for different age groups, different marks for different types of contests, different marks for whatever, but nobody gets to see their marks, so we don't know. But it completely depends on the individual judge which way they fill out their particular form. But as long as they achieve their purpose in life, which is picking a winner and picking a clear second and third, then it's all good with me. But you'll notice that this is the front of the sheet. There's also a back of the sheet. So see how that speech development, effectiveness, speech value, each of these is explained in pretty good detail on the back of the form. And so as we go through and read, speech development is supposed to be all these things, and the reason why that's there is to assist the judge to know what it is they're looking for in that criteria. And obviously more experienced judges will just remember that every single contest they go to, because they probably go to lots and lots and lots of contests. But for less experienced judges, it's well and truly worth reading that word for word before the contest starts so that they know what they mean. And just on that point, so have a look at the different types of contests. So a table topics contest also has content and delivery and language. But see here, in the content, it has speech development and effectiveness. And in the delivery, it has physical and voice. So compare that to international. In the content, in addition to the speech development and effectiveness that were for table topics, it adds a third one, which is called speech value. And in the delivery, in addition to the physical and the voice that were in table topics, it also adds a third one, which is called manner. But in language, it has the same two, so appropriateness and correctness that were in table topics, it has the exact same two.
Mm.
And then see these the three that are for international in the content section here. If you then look at a humorous speech, so instead of speech development and effectiveness and speech value, in a humorous speech, it has the same three: speech development, effectiveness, and speech value, plus a fourth one, which is audience response. And then it has the exact same three for delivery, physical, voice, and manner, and the exact same two for language, which is appropriateness and correctness. So when we go to a judge's briefing before the contest, what happens is that I know every judge's briefing that I've ever been to over however many years, the chief judge will usually pull out the humorous speech contest form and they'll turn over the page and say, go around the room for all the different judges, and they might say, Margaret, what does speech development mean to you? And don't forget that this form is sitting in front of you that you can refer to as you answer what it means. And if the chief judge thinks that you've done a really good summary of that paragraph, then they might just move straight on to Jim, what do you think effectiveness means? But if they want to just expand a little bit, they might just say, and how do you what else could it mean? And then they'll go on to speech value, and in the briefing we go through actually every single one of those dot points. So it's from speech development at the top all the way through to correctness at the bottom, every single one of them. And if you do it on the humorous form, then that includes the lot, whereas if you do it on the table topics one, then you have to do it again for the international because it didn't have speech value, and they have to do it again for the humorous because it didn't have audience response. So if you do it on the audience, if you do it on this judging criteria for humorous, then you've got the whole lot of them that applies to 3 different contests all on one form, and that saves a little bit of time in the briefing room if you go through that way, instead of having to do it 3 different times for the 3 different contests, assuming that you've got the same judges for all 3 contests, of course.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to that back of that form and that judging criteria, which is really critical. And it should be, every judge should be really well acquainted with that and be able to answer those questions. It's also an awfully good thing to give to a contestant.
Yes, exactly, because whether it's a Toastmasters speaking contest or whether it's any other type of contest outside of Toastmasters, if you're a contestant in any type of contest, you should know the rules and you should know what you're being marked against or judged against, or what qualifies as what the ways in which you can be disqualified. and all that sort of stuff. So in that terms, you really need to know these judging criteria just as well if you're a contestant as what you would if you're a judge. And then completely separate to that, then we go on to a different type of contest, which is the fourth one that we do here in District 69. I don't know that each district around the world is allowed to choose which 4 contests they do, and these are the 4 that we use in District 69. So if there's anyone here from other parts of the world that use tall tales instead of one of these 4, then refer to your own marking criteria. But see this one, it doesn't look anything like the forms from the previous 3 contests. So this one has analytical quality, recommendations, and then if you jump down to the bottom, summation. So 40, 30, and 15 down here. So in an evaluation contest, 85% of the mark is on what you say. And only 15% of the mark is split between delivery and language. And that's totally different to international, which was 50% for the content, as opposed to this one is 85% for the content. So, and that has explanations on the back of it as well as to how to go about what those analytical quality, you turn over the back of the sheet and it tells you what that means. And recommendations is explained here, and you can put your score in there. So now that we've had a look at those judging forms, we're just about to go into our presentation that we're all going to have a practice of judging and filling in a criteria sheet for our particular test speaker. And in this case, we've got a very experienced test speaker to come along today and do a speech for us. And we're going to get everybody to have a practice at filling out a judging form after the presentation. So, Jim, do you have an introduction for?
I
do. You
do.
have that? Excellent.
Thank you, Kevin. Today,
sorry, I'll just stop sharing my screen so that we can.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Today, we are lucky to have Maria Battazzoni giving our test speech presentation in our practice speech contest, which everybody will be able to play along at home and judge with the forms provided in the chat box. Maria's an expert Toastmaster. Last year, she worked so hard that she received her DTM, and now she is the TLI of Brisbane Division and is very active in Toastmasters and is a great resource for District 69. Her speech this afternoon is titled Waiting. I give you Maria Battazzoni with Waiting. This is an international speech which I will. And Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters near and far, and many friends that I have here. Waiting. How many times have you been in the supermarket, you're looking at that watch, you're frustrated because there's somebody in front of you and she's picked up 10 bottles of tomato sauce because they're on special. All you want is to get your groceries done. You want to get out of there as fast as you can. I'm sure you've all had that feeling. Let's move from the supermarket to the Prince Charles Hospital, a heart and lung specialty hospital on Northside Brisbane. And I'll take you to the cardiology ward, where I worked there once as an occupational therapist. And I met two beautiful people there. And guess what? They had severe heart deficits, and only a heart transplant was the answer. And they had to learn the meaning of the word wait. Now, it's another speech entirely to explain the how and the why you wait to have a heart transplant. These two people, Jack was 59 and young Dan at the age of 16. Just a little bit of an introduction about the heart. We all know that it's a muscle and it's pumping blood in and out. We have arteries and ventricles. Now, when one of these tubes gets wonky, for want of a better term, it needs to be replaced. Jack was the man with the poor ventricles. In order to survive the very long wait, he had to be hooked up to a special machine called a ventricular assistive device machine. That's what kept him alive. It kept his ventricle going until he got his heart transplant. Just to describe it briefly, on the surface, it looks as if it is one of those lovely, sleek travel suitcases with the handle extended. And this is what Jack was linked up to keep him alive. It made this incredible swish, swish, swish sound. Now, it wasn't an awful sound. It wasn't a grating sound. It wasn't even loud or terrible, but it was relentless and continuous. It was 24/7. You breathe, you sleep, you eat, you do all your self-care activities, listening to swish, 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 swish. Now, Jack was allowed to walk around the ward. He couldn't leave the ward. And I always remember him hanging onto his suitcase and moving around, up and down the ward. He was a very cheery, happy soul, I have to say. It was my very responsible job, and very scary, I might add. I had to check on him every day. I had to check that he was hooked up to this machine properly. He was so patient. I was very new to the job, but he didn't seem to mind. He was as happy as anything that I was able to look after him, spend time with him, say hello, check on his tube. I learned so much from him. His patience was extraordinary. His compliance was extraordinary. He never had a cross word. And I was in awe of this man's incredible patience. Now, I'd like to ask you all, would you like to be waiting with this machine attached to you 24/7? Could you live with that sound? Could you sleep with that sound? I know I would have an awful lot of trouble. But Jack taught me the most amazing patience. It was great to get to know him and listen to him talk. He was just amazing and very inspirational. And now we turn to young Dan. He was only 16 at the time. He affected me very deeply. Why? At the time, I too had a 16-year-old child, a daughter. And I was comparing Daniel's life in the ward. He was not allowed to go anywhere. And there's my daughter, Louisa. Wow. She was having the time of her life, as any 16-year-old would. There was always parties, school dances, shopping as only girls love to do, and then more parties. Yes, she did find some time for schoolwork when her mother reminded her. But she was living the normal life of a 16-year-old. And Dan, he lived in the hospital ward. He didn't require a machine to keep him alive, but he was very restricted with his movements. Interestingly enough, Jack and Dan did become good friends there. And it was lovely to see this friendship between them. Finally that day arrived. A heart was found, a suitable heart. As I said, it is certainly another speech, the how and the why you wait for a heart transplant. There was the most incredible joy in that ward from everybody, but none other than Jack and Dan themselves. Their waiting was finally rewarded, and that was a long wait. They waited weeks and weeks and weeks. Now, I'm asking you, all of you, what are you waiting for? If somebody asks you, will you write it down on your driver's license or any other form? There's your pen. Will you sign yourself up to be a heart donor one day? You never know who could be waiting. The next time you get frustrated at the supermarket because somebody's making you wait, have a think about it. What does waiting really mean? Back to you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for an excellent speech all about waiting. So I would like now to hand back to our presenter, Kevin. Kevin, would you like a quick evaluation of Maria's speech before we go into the debrief? Or do we not have time?
I thought we might just go straight on with the... Oh, do we have an official evaluator?
Yes, I've taken notes.
Oh, well, what we'll do is we'll do that straight after we do the judging for the international speech that Maria's just given.
Okay.
So on the thank you to our test speaker, and there would obviously be at a contest all sorts of different other speakers that would come up, and a minute silence, but we're not going to talk about the organisational part of running a contest today. We're going to talk about how to fill out this judges form, because we've all hopefully now got our judges form ready to go. And so here we go. So this is the back of the form. So like I said, how you fill it out is up to you, but I give you an insight in how I do it. If and maybe some other judges might do it this way too. So just note that it's now 3:36. Okay, so in speech development, have a think. If you've never read that through before, then have a read through it. But if you have read through it before, then have a think. Did Maria's speech have an opening, a body, and a conclusion. Were the links from one point to the next point to the next point, were they smooth, or was it jerky? Was it logically put together so that it made sense in the order that it was done? And then once you have all that in your mind, then what I would do, and maybe some other judges might do, is think, overall for that speech development, do I think it was fair, good, very good, or excellent? And then, and only then, once I've made that decision, I'll come over to fill in Maria's score. And if I thought it was very good, then that tells me that speech development in the very good should be somewhere between 14 and 19. So if I think it was on the high side of very good, I'll give it somewhere closer to 19. And I think if it was on the low side of very good, then I'll give it somewhere closer to the 14 than what I will to the 19. Or if I think it was just the average very good, then I'll give it about a 16 or a 17, because they're in about the middle of very good. That's how I mark a score anyway. So you can decide how you do it, or whether you want to give room above it or room below it, or however you do it. But that's how I do it. And then I'll go to the next criteria, and effectiveness. So in effectiveness, if you've never done this before, have a read through it. Was I able to determine the speaker's purpose, and did the speech relate directly to that purpose? And there's other parts in here that it talks about the effectiveness. So decide that for yourself. Have a think. Was it fair, good, very good, or excellent? And then come over here to effectiveness and the column that you're after, whether it was fair, good, very good, or excellent. And if you thought it was very good, then it'll be somewhere in the 11 to 14 range. If you thought it was fair, it'll be somewhere in the 0 to 5 range, and so on. And I'll fill in that score in Maria's column, whether it's 10 or 1, whichever column you're using. Then the speech value. So it justifies the act of speaking, so why Maria was there. And have a read through of that criteria, what constitutes speech value. Decide, was it fair, good, very good, or excellent? And once you've made that decision, then put it in the speech value row for that score range. And I will actually go through and I'll do physical and voice and manner and appropriateness and correctness. And I'll do that for every single different criteria. And then I'll put it into the score for Maria's column. And of course, that's now 3:41 in the afternoon. So that took 5.5, 6 minutes. Don't forget that you go faster as you become a more experienced judge. You don't have to reread that every single time. You can just look at these headings, speech development, and you know exactly what that means next time. So even though it took me 6 minutes to fill it out this time, on the day of a contest, you haven't got 6 minutes, you've got 1 minute. So get very familiar with what it says on the back, and you don't need to reread the back every single time. You can just see speech development, oh, of course. And you can just, as you get more and more used to judging, when all you really have to do is read speech development, and you can go straight to Maria's column and start writing down a 19, because you know straight away that you've already thought about whether it had a body, an intro, a body, a conclusion. Did they all connect together? And it only takes you 2 seconds to think of all that in your head and know that it should be on the high side of the very good. So that's how you get faster and faster as you get more experience as a judge. But that's how I would fill out a judging form. And if there was a second and a third and a fourth speaker, then some people don't. Some people are folding it away, so they never get to see the score again. But I figure my primary purpose in life is to pick a winner. So if the second speaker or the third speaker or the 10th speaker, if they are somewhere in the, like say the third speaker was very good and Maria was also very good for speech development, and I know that they were both very good, then I will consciously try to decide, but in the speech development, which one was the better, so that I can choose a winner in speech development, which one scored higher and which one scored lower. And that might be totally different to the physical, because they might have been, one speaker might have been better in speech development and worse in use of gestures. And they could win the content and they could lose the delivery. It really depends. You have to go through every different criteria on its own merits for that particular speech on the day, not how you heard it last time they delivered the speech or how you think they'll do it next time, but on that day. And as I said, they can win in one category and lose in another category. It's all about the judging criteria, because it's only when you add up the total score at the end that you get to decide whether or not they end up being any of the three places, or any of the place from first all the way through to 15th if there's 15 contestants if you're a tie-breaking judge. So that's how I would fill out my judging form. And then of course, put your totals down the bottom. And if it turns out that even after splitting which one was better at effectiveness and which one was better at appropriateness, if the swings and roundabouts, if you add it up at the finish and you still end up with two that are tied, then it's, guess what? Your primary purpose in life as a judge is to pick a winner, so you can't have a tie. So split them somehow, and please don't do it by tossing a coin. Please go back to your notes or to your pluses and minuses or to however you judge, whatever your criteria is that you do. Please go back to those and use those to pick which one of those two deserves an extra point, so that there's a difference between them, so that you can pick a clear first and a clear second and a clear third. So does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So you do that the way that it suits you, whether it's in column 10 or column 1, or using pluses and minuses, or writing notes, or comparing different, to pick, however you pick the winner. If you can pick a winner, then you've achieved your purpose in life as a judge. So then, now, did you want to give a 3-minute evaluation, Jim, so that we can do a judging for an evaluation?
Yes, I can give I'll give an evaluation style judge right now of Maria.
Okay, so sorry, do you want to run your own timing? I'm not sure how you want to do that.
I'll time myself.
Okay.
Okay. And 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I would like to thank Maria for an excellent speech all about waiting. Maria's speech was a fusion of two different types of speeches. It was firstly the story of Jack and Dan, which is a storytelling speech about how Jack and also Dan had similar heart issues, but also it was infused with informative speech, because when Maria talked about the stories of Jack and Dan, she also added in information about their heart issues and went into details about what it's like living with a ventricular assistive device machine. So we really understood in great depth about the issues that Jack and Dan were living with, and also how Jack and Dan had to survive like this day after day. So to me, infusing the two different styles of speeches, informative and storytelling, really helped to get the message across. I also liked Maria's great speech structure and language, how she linked in from one paragraph to the next, so they had a great flow. Like when she said from here to the hospital as like a segue, and each paragraph had a pause, a bit of a segue, then another pause, so it really flowed in. Also, she used many words which imitate the sound they make. That is called onomatopoeia, like woof woof or bark bark. She used swoosh, the swoosh swoosh of the heart machine. Great use of onomatopoeia. One thing I think Maria could really work on is her whole body gestures. Her hands were absolutely fantastic, but I think when it comes on Zoom, sometimes her head can be a bit lost and just sit there. And sometimes when you're really animated and the voice comes along and you use your vocal variety really good, the face can be a bit deadpan. It's almost like when you're on the phone and they say, smile when you're on the phone, people will actually notice it. Same thing in a speech online, but people can actually see your face. Smile, be really happy when you're doing your speech, and it really will show. Also, finally, I think Maria had a great point at the end when she said, it got us to think about the speech. She said, what are you waiting for? When will you mark yourself down as an organ donor? Those questions really got us thinking, and a great point we can take away so we can really understand and remember the speech in days to come. So overall, Maria, I think you had a great speech, which had quite a bit of, two different types of speeches, informative and storytelling. You had great speech structure and language with the segues and the onomatopoeia. If you can just look into how your facial expressions are during your Zoom speeches. And also, I like your call to action at the end of your speech. Well done, Maria, and congratulations.
And thank you, Jim, for that evaluation of Maria's speech. Now, if I can share my screen again.
The evaluation contest sheet is in the chat box.
Yep, so completely different style of judging criteria sheet to the previous one, but once again, so you'll note that this one is analytical quality, recommendations, technique, and summary. So analytical quality is how much the evaluator, in this case Jim, broke down what it was that Maria did. So I don't know how you want to do it, but in my case, the way that I sort of break this down is if the evaluator regurgitates that Maria said this, Maria said that, Maria did this, Maria did that, then as far as I'm concerned, then that is about a very low score, because that's not really analysing anything. That's just regurgitating, saying what they did. If they say that Maria did this and it was good, Maria did that and it was bad, then I'd give them a few extra marks, but still in the low scale, because they've attempted to make some sort of analysis of whether it was good or bad. But if they then said, Maria did this and it was good because it increased the communication. It made the message clearer to the audience. Or Maria did that, and it was bad because, and obviously you're going to use better words than good and bad, but you understand where I'm sort of thinking. If they say what was done, whether it was on a sliding scale of goodness to badness, and why you thought it was good or bad. So that then, as far as I'm concerned, the quality of the way they analyze why they thought it was good or bad is where they can get from a low score through the good, the very good, and even up to the excellent. The difference between a good score and an excellent score is the quality of their analysis, how much they can justify what it is they say. And I personally, if I'm doing an evaluation and Jim was doing an evaluation and I thought that Maria's gestures were the best thing since sliced bread, and Jim came on and said that Maria's were the worst gestures in the history of the world. If that's all he said, then I'd give him a really low score. And the next evaluator, they came on and they said Maria's were the best gestures ever, then I'd also give them a low score. So even though I agreed with one of them and I disagreed with the other one, I'd have to give both of them a low score because all they did was say whether they thought it was good or bad. If either of them said why they thought it was good or bad, so two different evaluators can come out in succession and one can say Maria's gestures were the best in the world ever, in the history of the world, and this is why I think they were the best, and give 1, 2, or 3 reasons why they thought it was the best, then they're going to get a really high score on analysis. If the next one comes out and says, I thought Maria's were the worst gestures in the history of the world, and these are 1, 2, 3 reasons why I thought they were the worst gestures in the world, then they can also get a really high score in analysis, because both of them, even though they were completely opposite ends of the scale, they both gave really strong reasons for analysis in their analysis. So they can both get a high score. But a good evaluator will get strong recommendations. And so if they can say, even though they thought it was could be improved, if they can say how it was to be improved and give concrete, doable suggestions for improvement, then that's where you'll see the difference between a mediocre evaluator, whether it's at a club level or at a district final contest. That's where the excellent evaluators come to the fore. And if you have some excellent evaluators, then get them into your club and doing evaluations as much as possible, because they will improve the performance of your club, your members, everybody that hears them.
Kevin, can we,
yes.
We have a point, if you could evaluate on the importance of signing the judges form correctly.
Oh, yes, yes. So after you've gone through each of those different things there, and don't forget, in Jim's case, he did do a summary, but don't be afraid that if a contestant is doing a really great evaluation and they look down and they see a red light and they just suddenly stop, if they don't do a summary, then guess what? You should give them a 0 for summary. But Jim did his summary, so he gets points for somewhere in there for the summary. So after you fill out your form and after every contestant has been on and you've totaled up your scores and you've worked out who's first, second and third, then you go to the bottom section of the form, and there wasn't one in the slideshow, but at the bottom of the form below this line, below.
Kevin, if you want to stop sharing for a second, I can share a full form.
Go for it.
Okay, great. Yep.
Okay, so see the dotted line about 25% up the form from the bottom, where it says that dotted line and the judge's official ballot. That's where you have to, and I suggest you do it before the competition even starts, have at least most of that dotted line ripped off, if not the entire thing. But I like to have a little bit of it still attached just in case it gets lost. But most judges will have that form prepared by already folding and cutting or tearing along the dotted line as early as possible before the contest, and look above to see which one is the highest score, put them in first, and then the next highest score, and the next highest score. And as we said before, if you have a first and second, or a second and third that have the same score, then your job as a judge is to pick a winner. So you have to split them and put down which one got a clear first, a clear second, and a clear third, or if you're the tiebreaker, all the way from first to 15th if there's 15 contestants. And then at the bottom, even though you might or might not be able to read it at the moment, one side of the form says your name printed, and the other side of the form says your name as your signature. You have to print your name and sign the form for the form to be valid, because if it arrives in the ballot counting room and the ballot counter opens it up and there's no name or no signature on it, guess what? It's an invalid form, and they're not allowed to leave the ballot counting room to come back to you to get you to sign it. It's counted as an invalid form, so you've wasted your entire process of doing all that scoring if it doesn't count. So I'm sorry, but when you're doing the preparation before the contest ever starts, if you possibly can, you fold that and tear or cut along the line and sign it and print your name then, because that way you won't forget it. That's my suggestion. Make sure you do it as early as possible so that there's no chance of you forgetting it, because that is one of the rules in the rule book, that if it's not signed and printed, then sorry, it's an invalid form.
Also, just to interrupt again, we've had one comment from Helen Cartmore, District 72, to say, I'll quote her words because it's said very well. Although the evaluation contest criteria uses the word recommendation in the plural, an evaluator should not be marked down if they only give one recommendation. This has been clarified with TI.
That's correct. Absolutely agree with the comment made. It's the quality of the recommendation, singular or plural, but it has to be doable, of course. There's no point giving a recommendation that a person with a stutter should, just stop stuttering. That's my recommendation. That's because it's not necessarily doable. But if you said to somebody that smile and try and relax, and maybe it will make it easier for you to give them a recommendation that is actually doable. So in Jim's case, Jim said if you smile more, it makes the voice sound happier and gives it a different tonal quality to if you're not smiling. And that was therefore that was doable just by doing smiling more in the speech. So it was a good recommendation from Jim because it was doable, and he said why it was his recommendation for improvement, not just saying, yeah, I think you should make your voice sound better. He actually gave a concrete example of if you smile more, then it makes your vocal tone and the vocal properties sound better. He actually gave a concrete example. So that would be a good recommendation. And as the person said in the comment, it doesn't matter whether it was 1 or 2, but it's the quality of those recommendations, the same as it's the quality of the analysis.
There was a second question in there as well that's just popped up, Jim and Kevin. It's about the ballot is invalid if it's missing a signature, not the name. It's also invalid if you do not place 3 contestants and there are 3 or more contestants. Just confirm that's correct again this year.
I'm not aware of that one about only the signature and not the name.
Kevin, can I interrupt because that's my comment?
Yes.
I watched one of the videos that Toastmasters put out about judging, and it's very clear in there that it's only invalid if it's missing the signature, not the name. And you have to place 3 contestants if there are 3 or more. If you only place 2 and there are 3 contestants, the ballot is invalid.
Okay, well, I will acknowledge the much superior knowledge of Toastmasters International and your recollection of that over mine. Thank you.
If you would like to go to the last couple of slides, there's just one at the end to go through.
Certainly. So we've had.
Sorry to interrupt there, Kevin. Oops. I just had a look at the rule book as well while we got that question from Helen, and it's on page 11, section K. It does talk about in order for the ballot to be valid, judges shall complete their ballots by entering their name, entering their choice of first, second, and third place. But it does also say sign and print their names on the ballot in the rule book at this stage. So it looks like that might be a grey area.
Yeah, I've always taken it to be both print and sign, but whatever.
2020 rule book, page 11. Yep. Anyway, for anyone that wants to look it up, onward and upward.
Yep. So just as this is always in the process of improvement. As all things in Toastmasters, we aim to get better and better and better every single time. So for you to find out some more ways that you can improve your skills in this area, here's a good little rundown. And don't forget, everyone's going to get a copy of this if you haven't already. If you've put your details in the chat, if you hadn't already got the information off Jim. But there's an example of some of the resources that you can go to, and I'll just point out what some of them are. So for instance, if you're going to use a rule book, make sure you use the correct rule book. Don't use the one from last year or from 15 years ago, because that's the one you had in print. Make sure it's this year's rule book. If you're going to have if you've got last year's and you want to see what's different, this is one of the things you can do. You can go and get the explanation of changes from one year to the next. If you have, this is a great resource from Toastmasters International that is all about running speech contests online, and in that it also refers to this, which is video recording guidelines. which is even more important at the district level. And because I've come across it in the last few days, and the lady who just placed that comment in the chat just a few moments ago, I believe this is the same person, is it, Helen? It's a fantastic resource from our neighbours across the ditch in New Zealand, in District 72. It was brought to my attention just in the last few days, and but it is an excellent resource that is also available, and you can get that from the District 72 website.
Okay.
And there's a few other links on here that you can also go and get. So, and they will be available to everybody who's being sent out this slideshow. So, thank you, and I'll hand back to Jim and stop sharing.
Firstly, I would like to thank Kevin and Margaret for presenting our session today. Everybody could give a Zoom applause for their excellent work today. Second, congratulations goes to Maria for her excellent speech. I'm sure we were all enthralled about it. Thirdly, due to the last few points Kevin made about different online presentations, if I will go here, no, here, I'll very quickly show you. We have on the 4th of October a Zoom session all about how to run an online speech contest, as in how to get Zoom working, how to incorporate judging we learned today, and everything you need to know to run your online speech contest. Because as we all know, all these speech contests this year from area and above are online per World Headquarters requirements. So if you're interested, that is the details. If you're interested, I can email you that. Anyone in the district and any of our New Zealand friends are also free to come if they're interested. And finally, I'll put my email in the chat. And please email me to get the slides, because I don't have everyone's email at the moment. Well, email at the moment, sorry. I'll put it to everybody. There, my email's in the chat. Please email me so I have your email, and then I'll pass you on the email you back with the slides in PDF and Zoom and PowerPoint, and feel free to use them however you wish. They're a resource for all. Thank you very much. I will stop share recording now.